of landscape transformation that rivers create is due to deposition. And most deposition, we said, was in the third zone of that river system. But again, I really want to underscore that deposition happens across the entire river system over time. So those little tiny particles that are being eroded in the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachians right now don't go moving down the system unstopped over time. They do pause for a period of time, and that period of pause is a period of deposition. So I want to make sure that that is clear. But most of the deposition happens at the terminus or the mouth of the river. All right. There are several places where we get deposition also occurring along a river system, and we're going to talk about that. So again, deposition happens when we've lost velocity in the river, when the speed and the capacity is no longer able to carry a certain volume of sediment or bed load. All right. Floodplains are an important area of deposition for all of humans' history over the last 10,000 years. We have capitalized on deposited material within floodplains because this is some of the richest agriculture in the world. The fine-grained silts and materials and organics that have come out of flooding situations offer very rich soils and great opportunity for agriculture. At the same time, these are there because these are areas that flood, and it's a precarious situation because we need the floods for that agriculture. At the same time, it's where people want to be, but the flood is a hazard. So what is a floodplain? A floodplain is the area which is adjacent to a river channel. The larger the river channel, the larger the floodplain. So some floodplains may be just a couple of feet across on either side of a river. Other floodplains can be hundreds of miles across. There is generally a direct correlation between the size of the floodplain and the size of the river. Most floodplains are in areas where the river had occupied some volume of the channel in the past, but that is not always the case. All right. Floodplains are formed when a flood occurs. It's carrying a lot of material, and when the flood waters start to recede, the volume goes down and material starts to fall out. The biggest stuff falls out first, and then the lighter stuff falls out sequentially to smaller to smaller to smaller. The flood occurs when the river's waters overcome the stream banks and it spills across the landscape. And because that water is spilling across the landscape, the velocity diminishes right away because it's shallow. And because that velocity is not very high, we start to deposit those wonderful organics and inorganics that are important for agriculture. In that creates something called a levee. And there are human-made levees and there are natural levees. And we're talking about the natural levees here. So the moment in which the water overcomes the bank of the river, the velocity drops immediately. And because we've lost a high velocity condition immediately, big parts of material that were being carried by the river are dropped immediately, and those occur adjacent to the river channel itself. And that material which was deposited creates a little lip or a little edge, and that little lip or that little edge is the levee. And the levee actually ends up keeping water from moving back into the stream channel. It acts like a little dam. So it keeps back water on the floodplain. Everything on the other side of the levee that's not in the stream channel, then is moving at a slower velocity, and it's depositing finer grained material farther away from the stream bank. So you get overall fine grained silts and materials. The deepest stuff is closest to the levee, but it's the coarsest material. And as you move away from the levee, the volume becomes diminished like a little wedge, but the grains become finer. So you get something like this. So before a flood event, this is my stream channel. And then a flood event spills on over the flood channel and deposits big material on either side of the channel itself, creating this little lip and this little edge, and actually accentuating or deepening the flood channel itself. So the next time it floods, it has to go flood even more and overcome this. So these natural levees actually act as flood barriers for future flood events. So that's a good thing. But this area adjacent ecologically has depended upon floods for nutrient renewal. So this is what happens. This here is the channel, but what you're seeing is the levee on either side. And out here, away from the channel, is the floodplain. So over the last century, humans have decided, hey, these floodplains work really, really well. Let's put more of them in. And what they've actually done is they've accentuated and made flooding worse. They keep the small floods from breaching the landscape, but when a large flood comes along, it overcomes the levee, and then it can't return back to the river. So the adjacent farmland in places like Iowa and Missouri don't drain very well, and the farmers and the cities and towns adjacent to these rivers succumb to very damaging flood events as a result. The other thing that man-made levees have done is they've increased the velocity of the river. And in doing so, they've increased the scouring and the erosion capacity of the river system. So here is the Mississippi floodplain. So what we're looking at is the area in this area right here. And so we can see the city right up in top here. And this is a really lovely satellite image because you see this clear delineation from this red zone to this taupe zone. And this is the edge of the floodplain. And if you look closely, you can see all these old river channels with all these historic oxbow lakes. So we've got lots of little curves all the way across this landscape. We're not seeing the other side on this side of the diagram for how far west the floodplain goes, but you can see this is a significantly large floodplain that is occurring here. Now, not every time the Mississippi floods is this whole area going to flood. It may flood only this area right here. A big flood might flood even more of the area. What we can see also from the satellite is we can read where the area has been recently wetted. So this oxbow is full of water, and you can see this dark color looks like wet clay, and that's exactly what it is. And so this wet clay tells me this area was underwater most recently. And you can tell what has flooded in the recent past, and it's the old levees in these old river channels that are probably keeping that water from flooding any further across the channel system.